Hey everybody, Dr. Ray here, and today I'm going to talk about the surfboard that I just made. So I just made my first surfboard. I'm going to go through all the steps that I went through. I'm going to talk about lessons learned, things that I did or did not learn from videos or websites or whatever, and basically just talk through the whole entire process. So first of all, let me talk about why I even made a new surfboard. So I have a shortboard, I have a fish, I have a longboard, and I have a paddleboard. But what I don't have is I don't have a mid-length board. So my goal was to make a mid-length board that would paddle better when the surf was a little bit bigger, but like a fat tide, which means like it was breaking really slow. So I had to make a new board for that. I priced some boards out from some of the local shapers, and they ranged anywhere from $700 to $1,200 for the board I wanted. So I decided, hey, maybe this is a good time for me to actually make my first board. So I did some research and realized, maybe it doesn't look too difficult. I'm sure I can do this. You know, I'm an artist and I love designing and creating. So I thought this would be a fun project. It's also something I'd wanted to do for like 20 years. So the first thing I had to do was figure out where to buy everything. So fortunately, I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, that has a place called Green Room Board Company, where you can actually buy all the materials that you need. They have a whole warehouse of everything that you need. So I did not have to pay for shipping. So I had all the tools I needed to create the surfboard, which I'm going to talk about as I go through each phase that you do need. But to buy all of the materials cost me around $250, $252 to be exact. That included the blank that I needed. That included the fiberglass cloth that I needed, the fin boxes, and the leash plug, and the resin. And the cool thing about that, so that's how much it cost me to build this board that I'm going to show you. $252 to build my own board, which is pretty cool, pretty cost effective. The cool thing is the next time I go build another board, I have enough resin left over for at least 1 to 2 more boards. So my cost will be more like $125 for my next board that I go build, because the blanks are pretty cheap, and the fin boxes and stuff. Okay, so I bought all that stuff from Green Room Board Company here in Wilmington, so I did not have to pay shipping. If you do have to pay shipping, it could start to get a little more pricey, and at some point it's probably going to get pricey enough that it's just worth you paying a shaper to do, because you will not do it as well, and I'll talk about some of that as I go through all the steps. All right. So the first thing that I had to do was pick my surfboard design. So how do you do that? Because I had to buy a shape, right? A blank. Now the cool thing was, like, once I knew the shape that I wanted, Green Room Surf Company or Board Company was able to kind of tell me what kind of blank I needed and cloth and everything. So they were able to help me out with that. But so what I had to do is I had to come up with a shape. I had to know what size and dimensions and everything that I wanted this to be. So I found there's a couple pieces of software on the internet that are free, but I found a cool app on my phone called iShaper. iShaper. It's 100% free. And basically what you do is you pick your shape, put the specs into it that you want, like the width and everything, and then you print it out on a printer. So you do need a printer for that, but you print it out and you make sure it's printed to size, and basically it prints like this huge piece of paper that you're going to draw on your blank. So I had the shape that I wanted, so I knew the size. So I called the shop and I told them what size. They told me what blank they had that would match that, right? I'll show a picture of my blank here. And then what I had to do is I had to, they also needed to know how I was going to, what's called glass the board. When I bought all my materials, so they kind of gave me some advice on that, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to that phase. All right, so the first thing that I am going to do when I get my shape home is I need to actually cut it out. So I had to cut out, so I printed out the shape on the paper, right? I put that on the board. I took a Sharpie marker and drew the shape on the board, and then I had to cut it. So basically you take a handsaw. Now I used EPS Marco foam. Super easy to work with and use. I don't know, I was doing an epoxy board, so I used EPS foam. That's what they had at the shop, and that's what I wanted. So I used EPS. So first thing I did is I hand sawed the actual shape. Took me roughly 10 minutes to handsaw. Less than that. Probably took 5 minutes because you're cutting through foam. Imagine cutting through like one of those like styrofoam coolers. Like it like slices through the stuff, right? So a handsaw like cut right through the foam. So I had a shape of a board, which was awesome. But I was making my board be about 2.75 to 3 inches in width. My board, the blank that I had, was about like 5 inches in width. So my next step, so there were actually two things that I had to do here. My next actual step was to sand that board down into the proper thickness, right? And that included the nose, the width, and the tail. And then I also had to be able to measure the thicknesses of those places. So what I actually did is I made a like claw clamp. I'll post a picture here. I made one out of just a piece of junky plywood that I had for free. Really simple to make. Probably took me 10 minutes to make this. But what I realized after I made it is I probably could have just taken any old tape measure and just measured the width, like eyeballed it, and gotten close enough to the dimensions that I wanted. So I think those of you at home, if you don't have a tool to measure the width of the center, you can pretty much eyeball it with a tape measure. I think you'll be good. So basically my next step was to sand the board down to the desired thickness. Not exactly the desired thickness, maybe like a millimeter or two thicker, just because I had to do some final sanding. So how did I do that? So basically what I got on the internet is people use these like, sanding blocks and certain grits of sandpaper to get it to sand it down. I started with 60 grit, which is pretty tough. And what I realized is this was going to take me like days to sand it down to the right size. So I thought, okay, I'm not doing that. And also what I realized when I started sanding, it's a huge mess. I mean, like mess like crazy all over the place. So please, what I found is I actually did it in my backyard. I put a nice tarp down around me and just did it in my yard, and that pretty much got all of it. It wasn't anywhere but on the tarp, and anything that blew in the yard I couldn't see, so it was fine. So in your yard is a great place to do it. Don't do it in a garage. Don't do it inside somewhere. Just do it outside, okay? And what really wasn't messy at all. I mean, it sticks to you and everything, so you gotta pay attention to that. And I did wear a mask when I did the sanding. But what I found to actually sand it down really quick to get that like 2 inches off that I needed to get off was just using a rotary sander that you can buy at Walmart or Home Depot. And I had one, so I was able to just use that. And that was able to sand down the board so quick to the shape I wanted. It probably took me, I'd say, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to actually get it down to the right thickness using the rotary hands tool. The sanding block would have taken me like forever. And I did use the sanding block for some of that once it was like finally down to the width. The next thing that I had to do was the rails. Now this was a part that I was a little scared about. So I have the board the right thickness, but I need to sand the rails. I was really nervous about doing the rails correctly because you read online and it's like, do you want them like this, that, or the other thing? I was going to go for regular, just 50-50 rails on this board. So I found on Green Light website, they had a bunch of directions on Green Light surf. So I remember I bought my materials from Green Light, which is another company up in New Jersey. Which is actually a place where I used to live. They have tons of information and also sell materials. So I use their site a lot for stuff, but they have directions on cutting the rails. The rails were actually super easy. I just followed their directions. So Green Light Surfboard, get their directions on how to do their rails. It's just a matter of measuring several lines. Super easy to do. I just sanded the rails to the right line. It was really easy. Probably took me 10 minutes to do the rails pretty good. So the board is sanded. I have the board nice and smooth and sanded. I have it shaped. The board is shaped. So I got that mess done. One of the things I really learned after I was done shaping my board is the place where I bought my board from did offer machine shaping. It was like $50 or $70 or something like that. After shaping the board myself, I realized that the next time I do a surfboard myself, I'm totally going to have them machine shape the board because it was not fun for me. And I thought glassing was much easier, which I'm going to get to. So I machine shape the board, or I will machine shape the board the next time I do this. But this time I did it by hand, and I can always say I did it by hand, blah, blah, blah. Great. Lucky me. I got to do all this work. Okay. So I did that. So there were a couple things that were a little confusing about what to do next. So some videos that I watched on the internet said that now is the time when you want to cut out your fin boxes. And some said, no, glass the board, then do the fin boxes. And so I was a little confused about that, and what I realized is it probably doesn't matter. It's just someone's preference about when they want to do it. So there was no like right or wrong answer there. I have a friend that's a shaper, and he suggested that I do it afterwards. It would be easier. So I just took his advice and did it that way, and it did work out fine. But when you glass the board, all the glassing the board means is that you put a fiberglass cloth on the board and put epoxy onto the cloth. That's called glassing. So when you do the top of the board, you use 2 layers of cloth. So like sometimes you'll hear like 4 ounce and 6 ounce or 6 and 6. And basically what that means is that you put both layers of 6 down and then put the epoxy on. Or you just put 1 layer of 6 and 1 of 4 on top of that and put the epoxy over top of it, because there are different like strengths of the material. I use 6/6, which is what most people use on longer boards. This was a mid-length, so I did want it to be a little stronger. And it was my first board. I was a little nervous about me making it in general. So the stronger, the better. It was okay if this board was a little heavier because it was a mid-length. It wasn't a shorty. So I did 6/6. So basically to glass the top of the board, I put both 6 ounce fiberglass cloths down. I mixed the epoxy. So the epoxy that I had was 20-minute working time, which is more than enough time. So that was perfect. I wouldn't recommend 5-minute. I think 20-minute was good. So at like 20 to 30 minutes, it started to harden up. Basically what I did is you have to use gloves when you're using the epoxy because it's really sticky and messy. So you got to have some kind of gloves. What I did is I got like a pitcher, an old pitcher that I had, like a, lemonade type pitcher, plastic one. And I used that for all my glassing, which was perfect because if there was any resin left over, it would just dry and harden at the bottom in like a perfect shape. And I could reuse it. So that was a great thing for me to use. So I used this pitcher. I could just have one pitcher to keep mixing. And then I went to Lowe's and I bought I bought like $5 or $6 paintbrushes that I was going to use for each thing. And I also used a screwdriver head to stir the epoxy. So when you're measuring the epoxy, I did mine by weight. So that I have an electric digital scale, and that's what I use to mix it so that my measurements were exact. Just read the directions on your epoxy and make sure you were following it. Mine was like, I don't know, I can't remember the exact amount, but it was like 3-to-1 or something like that. So for every, 3 cups or whatever, 3 pounds of, no, for every 3 ounces that I put in of the resin, I put the 1 ounce of hardener. It was something like that. I can't remember exactly. So, but I just measured it out. I would calculate it, have it written down on a sheet, and then I would mix it. Really simple. Stir it for like 2 minutes. I'd have like my cloth down, and then I would just pour the resin on. That part was pretty easy to spread. Just watch some videos on how to do it, but that was pretty easy. Now, one thing that I didn't do when I did the first glass job, when I did the bottom, I did this. So what I didn't do is some of the videos that I watched showed you using like masking tape or some kind of tape, like painter's tape, on the other side of the board to help prevent sanding and some errors in the future. So what they did is before they would glass the board, they would actually use like masking tape or painter's tape underneath the layer. So if I was glassing the top, I'd put the masking tape on the bottom. I didn't do that when I did the top and the first layer. What happened was after I glassed, which was actually really simple, once it was dry and I turned the board over, oh man, I had to sand so much fiberglass, and fiberglass is really unhealthy. So and it's also really hard and it cuts you. I actually had little cuts I was wearing gloves, but I still got little cuts on my fingers from it. It was like everywhere, and you can just imagine how bad that is. So I had to wear like, one of those big heavy duty masks because you don't want to breathe that stuff in. But it was nasty stuff, and I had to really sand a lot because I did not use tape. If I would have used tape, it would have been much, much, much easier. So when you're finding your video for how to glass, find one that shows you how to use the masking tape because it saves you time. So then what you do is you I flipped it over, sanded it, got it down pretty good, and then you glass the bottom of the board. So I did that. I glassed the bottom, except this time I used the masking tape. Oh my goodness. It saved me at least like an hour or two of time. It was way cleaner, and I didn't have to do all that sanding. I literally, after the bottom dried, I flipped it over, took the tape off, and it was a really light, quick 5-minute sand, and it was perfect. So it was much, much, much easier to do that. Okay. So I did that, and at this point, so my board is now dry. This is when I did my fin boxes. So some people do the fin boxes after they do their hot coat, which I'll talk about next. I decided to do mine before just because I thought if I messed up, I could, I thought it would be better if I messed up, I could put another coat on or something like that. And all the videos seem to tell you different things about when to install the fin boxes, so I assumed it was mostly preference. So I did my fin boxes next. So the fin boxes were something I was a little nervous about. So I used a longboard fin box for my center fin, and then 2 FCS Fusion for the side. I used the FCS Fusion for the side because that was what he said would be the easiest when I ordered them from the shop. And the longboard center is what I wanted. Actually, after surfing the board now, I'm only using a single fin in it anyway. And I kind of assumed that, but I wanted the option, so that's why I put the side fins in. But what I was nervous about with the 10-inch center fin box was cutting out the stringer, because a lot of the videos online, what they show you and tell you that you need to do is you need a pattern shape, and you need a special rotary tool that's going to like go down there and cut out your shape really quick, or else you're kind of like stuck in the dark. Like, you need this tool. And I was nervous because that was the one tool I didn't have, and the tool itself was like $100-some, and the pattern shape was like, I don't know, $30. And I was like, man, that's like $170 for like one step of this. And that adds such a significant cost. And I get, like, you buy it one time and you have it, but I was like, am I making more boards? I don't know. So I thought to myself, let me just see if I can figure out a way using a drill or a little Dremel tool or something, oscillating tool, to do this part of the board. So what I did is I basically took the fin box and I laid it on top of the board and traced it. So that I had like with a Sharpie marker, I traced it. I traced the shape of the fin box. Then I took my little Dremel tool, which is like a rotating tool, and I cut the shape of the board. It took me like 1 second. Now, I didn't touch the stringer. I just did it around the stringer. This took me like literally 30 seconds to cut the shape. Super easy. And then the FCS Fusion, I just did that. I traced the shape and cut them in like 1 second. So that was easy. So I was like, okay, so this Dremel tool works perfectly for cutting this. I put the Dremel tool on the stringer, and I was like, oh man, okay. So the Dremel tool does not cut the stringer at all. So I was like, what am I supposed, so how do I cut the stringer? So I was starting to like think of like various options of how I could do this. And I did see one video online, or someone maybe posted on Swaylock's website forum, that back in the day, they just used to use a wood chipper. Just a wood chipper, and like chip the stringer. And I thought, well, I have some of those, like this little, like, it's just like a carving tool, like a You know, you can literally buy them at Lowe's or Home Depot for less than $10. It's a little set of them, a little carving tool. So I got one of those, and I didn't even use my hammer, and I just like shucked it a couple times, and the stringer cut like butter. It was so easy. I was like, oh my goodness, this is actually just as literally. So let's say the special tool they wanted me to buy for $150 would have taken me, I don't know, 30 seconds to cut this out. With the hand, like carving thing, it took me maybe 2 minutes. Super easy. The stringer cut like butter. And I was like, why are all these videos telling me to buy this tool and websites and stuff when it was so easy to do with this carving tool that was so super cheap by hand? Now I can understand if you're like a professional shaper and you're doing this all day, like you're not going to do that. But for someone like me doing this one time or even a few times per year, totally just use the hand carving tool. Super easy. Literally took me a second and I was done. I was like, that was the part of the board I was so nervous about, and I had done it. Super easy. Okay, so then I have my fin boxes cut out. So the next step, which is the worst step for me, was gluing the fin boxes in. And I'll tell you why it turned out to be the worst step for me and what you need to avoid. So basically, you know, there's a bunch of videos. Go watch them about how to glue the fin boxes in. It's pretty easy. Basically, you put some glue and cut some fiberglass, put it inside, and you stick the fin boxes in and they're glued. Okay, so the side fin boxes were pretty easy. I just put them in, glued them, and I had some tape over the holes. Now, the center fin box was a little more tricky, because the center fin box I needed to make sure was lined up correctly, because, you know, the center fin could be like, you don't want it to be turned, right? You want it to be perfectly aligned. So I didn't have a piece of tape in the fin box. So what that meant is when I stuck the fin box in, apparently a little bit of glue went into the fin box, and then what you do is you stick a fin in there and like some tape around it to line it up. Right? Well, I didn't realize a little bit of glue was in there. Maybe I saw some, but I didn't really think too much about it. So my fin's in there, perfectly even. And you basically just eyeball that. Watch some videos on how to do that, but it was pretty simple. And I come back after it's dry, and the fin is glued into the box. Oh, that was totally not fun. So I had to get the fin out of the glue box. Probably took me 2 hours of destroying the fin, sawing, hammering, and drilling it out of the fin box. It was not fun. It was absolutely terrible. Took forever. Was terrible. Just not a fun experience. So, yeah. So anyway, do not glue the fin in the fin box. Whatever you do, when you do this step, protect the fin box. Do not get any glue in it. If any goes in, wipe it up immediately. Get it out of there. Just don't do what I did. Get that glue out of the fin box. Okay, so once I had my fin boxes in, the board was pretty much done. So what I did is I sanded it pretty nicely. And then it was time for me to put my logo and hot coat on. So let me talk about what that means. So basically, to do my logo, they recommend using rice paper and printing it out, but we're in the middle of COVID and it's taken forever to get things in the mail. I didn't want to do that. So what I did is I actually just printed on a regular piece of paper, cut it out and put it on, and it actually worked perfectly. So I guess you can use regular pieces of paper. It probably adds a little more weight doing that, but like how a little logo on a piece of paper, like how much weight are we talking about? Like nothing that I cared about. Maybe you do use the rice paper, but it worked fine. So anyway, I'll talk about how I did that and how I put this hot coat on. So all the hot coat means is that you're just taking some epoxy after the board's done. Like I sanded it, I got the fin boxes all done. Oh, and I did the leash plug too then. So, which is the same thing as the fin boxes, just drilling in and gluing. And I use the Dremel for that. So all the hot coat is taking some epoxy and just painting it over the board. And there are a couple ways to do that. Now what I did is I got the board nice and sanded. The fin boxes are in. I sanded the board good, so it was nice and perfectly smooth as I wanted it. Used some different types of sandpaper. I probably used 60 and 100 grit. Those were the only two grits I really used for the whole entire project. I used 60 and 100, and then so it was nice and smooth. So first I did the top, then the bottom, or maybe, I can't remember, maybe I did it reversed. Anyway, so when I did the top, I put the logo, I just put the piece of paper down on the board where I wanted it to be. I mixed epoxy together, and I just took one of my paintbrushes and painted the whole entire board with epoxy. And let it dry, flipped it over, and painted the whole entire bottom. That's all the hot coat is. And then what I did is I lightly sanded anywhere that needed to be sanded if it did. And that was it. I actually kept the board glossy, so it's pretty glossy. I don't have any glossy boards, so I thought this would be a fun one to have like that. And that was it. Some people actually will sand it and then put another layer of hot coat on if they want it to be a little harder. But my board was pretty hard, and I had used that 6x6 cloth of fiberglass, so I didn't think I needed anything else. And that was it. Here are some pics of the final pic of my board, what it looks like. You can see what it looks like. Pretty cool. The board ended up being 6'8" by 22.5 by about 2.75 in the dead center, which is perfect. Exactly what I wanted. Perfect mid-length board for me. I took it out, and luckily... So, you know, when can you use your board after you're done? It's all dry and done and everything. If I found some different things online, it probably depends on the temperature and epoxy you're using, like temperature in your garage or house or wherever you do this. I did all my glassing in the garage, which was completely fine. I forgot to mention that. So the carving of the board I did outside, the sanding, and then I did all of my glassing in my garage. You know, it says about 4 days for full cure. I think I took my board out after maybe 5 or 6 days. There happened to be a swell coming in, the perfect kind of swell for my board. And I was really, really nervous. So the board it's super white compared to my other boards, which are like so old and yellowed. I don't think I bought a short board. I don't think I bought a shortboard since like 2005 2003 maybe is the last time I bought one. So my boards, my shortboard and my fish are really old. So they're like really aged and yellow. So this board's like bright white. I got to the parking lot, I waxed it down, which was awesome. Pretty cool, neat to wax a board that was mine. Some of my buddies came over and checked it out, and thought it was pretty cool, thought it looked neat. Liked my logo, thought it looked good. I mean, they couldn't believe I made it. It looks like a perfect board and everything, right? And I surfed it. I paddled out. It was really floaty, which I knew it was going to be. So duck diving it was a little troublesome compared to my fish or my shortboard, but that was the trade-off, right? The mid-length, I sacrificed some duck dive ability for the ability to paddle faster when there's drift and stuff. Caught my first wave. Great. Awesome. It was probably like a nice chest high, clean. It was a great day. It was like waist to head high that day. Perfect. Probably caught like a nice chest high wave, got some turns in, felt good. The board felt great. I was really happy. Now, one of the things someone might ask me is, well, if you can just make a board, is there any reason to have a shaper or go to a shaper when you can just make it for so cheap? And the answer is absolutely yes, there's a reason to go to a shaper. So, first of all, I was lucky I had all the tools. I have a garage, I have a yard to make all this stuff. So if you don't have a place or tools, would be a big pain to do this project. I also, I've been making stuff for years in my house, so like I have some know-how of how to use all this stuff. I didn't have to like go find a special saw. Like I pretty much had everything. So that made a big difference. But what I realized as I was doing this is there were tons and tons of imperfections of my board as I look at it right now, that when I go to a surf shop and look at all the boards on the rack, I don't see that stuff anywhere. So, what are you paying for? You're paying for someone's time, first of all, because, man, it took me probably like total time, like 15 to 20 hours to make this first board. Yes, that would be cut down a lot the next time, because a lot of that was research and everything, but still took me a long time. But, yeah, so just kind of crazy, but you're paying for their skill set. All those imperfections that I had, they wouldn't have. You're paying for someone who knows what they're doing. You're paying for a really good skill. So especially like on the rails, like making them perfect and the nose thickness and man, there's a lot of things that I probably messed up that they would not. So I totally see the value now in a shaper. Like it's worth the $600 or $800 versus you doing it if you need it to be perfect. But for me, I'm probably gonna shape all my boards forever now. I'm definitely gonna get it machine shaped first of all, and then I'll do the glassing. Because I didn't mind that part and I think it was pretty cool. So anyway, give it a try. Lots of fun. Definitely do your research. I bought my stuff from Green Rooms Board Company in Wilmington, North Carolina. Websites, I used lots of sway locks, lots of YouTube, Greenlight surfboards, they're in this company in New Jersey, Greenlight, tons of information, and they sell materials too. So, just all that stuff combined together. Be sure to watch lots of videos before you do each step. And anyway, hope you enjoyed. Later, all.